Some of you came here tonight with a smile on your face, but a storm in your heart. You've learned how to look strong on the outside while fear whispers to you in the quiet moments. You lie awake at night replaying the same questions again and again. What if this never changes? What if I fail? What if God doesn't come through this time? And worry has wrapped itself around your soul so tightly that you can hardly breathe. Let me tell you something right from the beginning. Worry is not the voice of faith. Worry is the sound of trying to carry a burden you were never meant to carry. Everywhere we look today, worry is on display. People worry about money, about health, about their families, about the future of this world. We worry about doors that seem closed, prayers that seem unanswered, and problems that feel far too big for us. But the greatest tragedy is not that we face impossible situations. The tragedy is that we forget who our God is in the middle of them. We begin to measure our problems by our strength instead of measuring them by God's power. There was a man in Scripture who stood before an impossible sea with an impossible enemy behind him. The water blocked his path forward, and fear chased him from behind. There was no bridge, no boat, no human solution in sight. Everything around him said, "It's over." Yet God said, "Stand still and see." And when the moment came, the sea did not ask how strong the man was. It responded to how powerful God is. What looked like the end became the beginning of deliverance. The lesson is clear. What blocks you may be the very thing God uses to reveal His glory. Worry tells you that you're alone. Faith tells you that God is near. Worry says, "What if?" Faith says, even if the doctor's report doesn't change, God is still good. Even if the money doesn't come on time, God is still faithful. Even if the door stays closed longer than you expected, God is still in control. We must remember that God has never failed, not once, not ever. The same God who parted seas, who fed multitudes, who raised the dead, is the God who is watching over your life right now. Some of you are worried because you've prayed and you haven't seen results. You've cried out and heaven seems silent. But silence does not mean absence. Just because you don't see God working doesn't mean He isn't moving. The roots of a tree grow deep in the soil long before the fruit ever appears on the branches. God often works the deepest miracles where no one can see. He shapes character, strengthens faith, and prepares hearts before He changes circumstances. Worry also comes when we try to control what only God can handle. We grip the steering wheel of life in panic when the road takes an unexpected turn. But peace comes when we finally loosen our grip and say, "Lord, I trust You." Trust is not pretending the problem doesn't exist. Trust is looking straight at the problem and saying, "My God is bigger than this." It is choosing to rest in God's promises when everything around you feels uncertain. There was a time when a young shepherd stood before a giant. The giant had experienced armor and a terrifying reputation. The shepherd had nothing but faith and a simple stone. From a human perspective, it was an unfair fight. But the battle was never about the size of the giant. It was about the size of the God behind the shepherd. And when that stone was released, it carried more than force. It carried faith. Giants still fall when God's people stop worrying and start trusting. Worry will drain your strength, steal your joy, and cloud your vision. It will make you forget yesterday's victories and fear tomorrow's unknowns. But faith does the opposite. Faith lifts your eyes beyond the problem and anchors your heart in hope. Faith reminds you that God's timing is perfect, even when it feels slow. Faith declares that nothing is impossible for God, not your healing, not your restoration, not your breakthrough, not your future. You may say, "But you don't understand how impossible my situation is." And you're right, I don't. But God does. He understands every tear you've cried, every fear you've buried, every prayer you've whispered. He is not intimidated by your impossible situation. In fact, Impossibility is where God does his finest work. When human strength runs out, divine power steps in. Tonight, God is calling you to lay down your worries, not tomorrow, not when things get better, now. He's asking you to trust him with the very things that scare you the most. Trust him with your family. Trust him with your future. Trust him with your unanswered prayers. Trust him with the impossible. Because when you place your life in his hands, you place it in the safest place it could ever be. There is a peace that doesn't make sense, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a peace that can only come from God. And that peace becomes real when you stop worrying and start trusting. The world may shake, plans may fail, doors may close, but God remains unchanging. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So lift your eyes, take a deep breath, release the burden you were never meant to carry. Trust the God who has carried generations before you and will carry you through whatever lies ahead. The impossible is not a barrier, it is an invitation. An invitation to see God move in ways you never imagined. An invitation to exchange fear for faith. An invitation to stop worrying and trust God with the impossible. Worry has a quiet way of entering the heart. It doesn't arrive loudly or suddenly. It slips in through unanswered questions, through moments of uncertainty, through the pressure of tomorrow pressing against today. At first it feels harmless, almost responsible, as if worrying proves that we care. But over time, worry begins to drain the soul. It steals peace one thought at a time, weakens joy, and leaves the heart tired before the day has even begun. Worry convinces us that we must solve everything ourselves, that the weight of life rests entirely on our shoulders, and that if we let go for even a moment, everything will fall apart. When worry takes hold, it narrows our vision. We begin to see only what we lack, only what could go wrong, only the limits of our own strength. Fear magnifies the problem while shrinking our sense of hope. We replay worst-case scenarios in our minds, rehearsing disasters that may never come, and in doing so, we surrender today's peace to tomorrow's uncertainty. The heart becomes restless, the mind becomes crowded, and the spirit grows weary under a burden it was never designed to carry. Faith speaks a different language. Faith does not deny reality, but it refuses to be ruled by it. Faith lifts the eyes from the problem and fixes them on God's power. Where worry asks, what if this fails? Faith declares, God is able. Where worry focuses on human weakness, faith rests in divine strength. Faith reminds the heart that life is not held together by our planning, our effort, or our control, but by the hand of God himself. There is a great difference between caring and worrying. Caring brings responsibility. Worrying brings fear. Caring leads us to prayer. Worrying leads us to panic. Caring trusts God with the outcome. Worrying tries to predict and control what lies ahead. When we choose faith, we are not choosing ignorance or denial. We are choosing trust. We are choosing to believe that God sees what we cannot see, knows what we do not know, and works in ways far beyond our understanding. Worry exhausts the soul because it demands constant attention without offering solutions. It circles the same thoughts again and again, promising safety but delivering anxiety. Faith, on the other hand, restores strength because it places the weight of the problem where it belongs. Faith does not say the journey will be easy, but it assures the heart that it will not walk alone. It anchors the spirit in something unshakable when everything else feels uncertain. When faith rises, peace begins to return. Not because the situation has changed, but because the heart has changed its focus. Peace grows when we remember that God has been faithful before and will be faithful again. Peace comes when we stop measuring our circumstances by our limitations and start measuring them by God's promises. Faith brings rest to the weary heart by reminding it that the outcome does not depend on human strength alone. Every act of faith weakens the grip of worry. Every prayer replaces fear with trust. Every moment spent remembering God's power restores hope that worry tried to steal. Faith invites us to release control and to rest in the truth that God is working even when we cannot see it. It teaches the heart to breathe again, to hope again, and to stand firm even in uncertain times. There are moments in life when the situation before us feels completely impossible. No amount of effort, planning, or determination seems enough to change it. Doors remain closed, answers delay, and every human solution runs out. In those moments, fear often whispers that this is the end, that nothing can be done, and that hope has finally reached its limit. But impossibility is not a signal of defeat. It is often the setting where God chooses to reveal His greatest power. Throughout history, God has stepped into moments when people had no strength left of their own. When the problem grew too large for human hands, God showed that His power is not limited by circumstances, time, or resources. The impossible does not intimidate Him. What overwhelms us does not overwhelm God. Where we see an ending, God sees an opportunity to demonstrate who He is. He allows situations to reach a point where human effort can no longer take the credit, so that faith may rise and His glory may be clearly seen. Impossible situations strip away self-reliance. They remove the illusion that we are in control and bring us face to face with our need for God. When everything is manageable, faith can remain shallow. But when life presses us beyond our limits, faith is either surrendered or strengthened. In that space of surrender, when we admit that we cannot fix it ourselves, God begins to work in ways that go beyond our understanding. What feels like weakness becomes the doorway to divine strength. Many people believe that God only works when circumstances are favorable, when the timing seems right, or when the resources are available. Yet time and again, God has shown that He works best when the odds are stacked against His people. He waits until the moment when doubt has exhausted itself and hope seems unreasonable, then He moves. In doing so, He makes it clear that the victory was never human. It was always His. The impossible also tests the heart. It reveals what we truly believe about God. When the situation does not change quickly, impatience rises and discouragement settles in. Questions begin to form and faith feels fragile. Yet even in that tension, God is shaping something deeper. He is teaching trust that does not depend on immediate results. He is forming faith that stands firm even when answers are delayed. The waiting becomes part of the miracle. God's power is not limited to dramatic moments alone. Sometimes the miracle is not the sudden removal of the problem, but the strength to endure it. Sometimes it is peace in the middle of chaos, courage in the face of fear, or hope that refuses to die. These are not small works. They are evidence of God's presence and power at work in the human heart. What seems ordinary from the outside is often extraordinary on the inside. When God moves in impossible situations, He does so in ways that leave no doubt about the source. Fear gives way to awe, despair turns into gratitude, and weakness is replaced with renewed faith. The situation that once felt like a dead end becomes a testimony of God's faithfulness. What was meant to break the spirit becomes the very thing that strengthens it. In the hands of God, the impossible is never wasted. There are times when heaven feels quiet and prayers seem to echo back unanswered. Words are spoken with sincerity, tears fall with honesty, yet nothing appears to change. In those moments, doubt begins to creep in, not always loudly, but gently, persistently, asking whether God is truly listening or if He has somehow turned away. Silence can feel heavier than refusal because it leaves the heart suspended between hope and fear, waiting for a sign that may not come as quickly as expected. Yet silence does not mean absence. Just because there is no immediate response does not mean God is distant or unconcerned. Often, the most important work happens beyond what the eyes can see. Beneath the surface, where roots grow unseen, God is preparing something deeper than a quick answer. He is strengthening faith, shaping character, and aligning the heart with His purpose. The quiet season is not empty. It is full of unseen movement. Human nature craves instant results. We want clarity, direction, and resolution without delay. When these things do not arrive on our schedule, frustration builds. We assume that waiting is a sign of neglect, when in truth it can be a sign of care. God understands the full picture, not just the moment we are standing in. He sees how today's answer will affect tomorrow's outcome, and He delays not to deny, but to protect and prepare. In the silence, faith is refined. It moves from dependence on visible signs to trust in God's unchanging nature. When prayers are answered quickly, faith rejoices, but when they are delayed, faith matures. It learns to stand without constant reassurance. It learns to believe without immediate evidence. This kind of faith does not weaken in the waiting. It grows stronger, more resilient, and more deeply rooted. Silence also teaches the heart to listen. When the noise of expectation fades, the soul becomes more aware of God's gentle presence. The heart begins to notice peace where anxiety once ruled, guidance where confusion once lingered, and strength where weakness once prevailed. God often speaks most clearly not through dramatic change, but through quiet assurance that He is near and in control. Many assume that God's nearness is measured by how quickly He responds. But His closeness is not determined by timing. He is present in every tear, every whispered prayer, every moment of uncertainty. He walks with His people through the waiting, offering comfort and sustaining hope even when answers are slow. The silence becomes a place of communion rather than abandonment. Unseen work takes time. Just as a seed remains hidden before breaking through the soil, God's purposes often develop quietly before becoming visible. The waiting period is not wasted time, it is preparation time. It strengthens trust, deepens reliance, and builds a foundation that can support the blessing when it finally arrives. What feels like delay is often divine design. When the silence finally breaks, the heart realizes that God was present all along. The waiting reveals that faith was not misplaced, prayers were not ignored, and hope was not in vain. The unseen work comes to light, and the season of silence is understood not as absence, but as a powerful chapter in God's faithful work. There is a deep rest that the human heart longs for, yet so often it feels just out of reach. We try to find it by planning more carefully, working harder, or controlling every possible outcome. We believe that if we can manage all the details, then peace will finally arrive. Instead, the opposite happens. The tighter we hold on, the more anxious we become, and the heavier the burden grows. Control promises security, but it delivers exhaustion. Life has a way of reminding us that we are not in charge of everything. Unexpected changes, sudden losses, and unanswered questions interrupt even the best laid plans. When control slips away, fear rises, and the heart resists surrender. We worry that letting go means giving up or admitting defeat. But surrender is not weakness. It is an act of trust, a recognition that some things are too heavy for human hands to carry alone. True peace does not come from understanding every detail. It comes from trusting the one who understands all things. Trust shifts the focus from circumstances to God's character. It says, even when the path is unclear, God is faithful. Even when the outcome is uncertain, God is good. This kind of trust does not erase difficulty, but it changes how the heart responds to it. Fear loosens its grip, and anxiety begins to fade. Uncertainty is one of the greatest sources of worry. The unknown creates space for fear to grow, and the mind fills that space with imagined outcomes. Yet faith teaches the heart to live without full knowledge. It allows the future to remain in God's hands while finding peace in the present moment. Trust does not demand to see the entire journey. It takes the next step believing that God will guide the way. Letting go of control requires humility. It means accepting that human wisdom is limited and that God's ways are higher than our own. This surrender does not come naturally. It must be chosen again and again. Each time fear rises, trust must answer. Each time anxiety whispers, faith must respond. Over time, this practice transforms the heart, replacing restlessness with calm assurance. Peace that comes from trust is not fragile. It does not disappear when circumstances remain difficult. It settles deep within the soul, providing stability even in the middle of uncertainty. This peace does not depend on solutions or timelines. It flows from confidence in God's presence and promises. While the world searches for peace and control, faith finds peace in surrender. Trust also frees the heart from the pressure of outcomes. When everything depends on human effort, failure feels unbearable. But when life is placed in God's hands, the burden of success and failure no longer rests on the shoulders alone. The heart is released from striving and allowed to rest, knowing that God is at work even when progress feels slow. In letting go, something remarkable happens. Strength returns, clarity increases, and the heart begins to breathe again. Trust opens the door to peace that logic cannot explain. It allows the soul to remain steady while circumstances shift and change. When control is released and trust is embraced, the heart discovers that peace was never found in holding on, but in placing everything safely into God's hands. At the end of all our striving, all our questions, and all our silent battles, one truth remains unshaken. God has been faithful every step of the way. Even when fear shouted louder than faith, even when worry clouded the mind and weakened the heart, God did not move away. He stood steady, patient, and present, waiting for his children to lift their eyes and remember who he is. Life may have felt overwhelming, but it was never out of God's control. The greatest turning point does not come when circumstances suddenly change, but when the heart chooses trust over fear. In that decision, something powerful happens inside. The weight begins to lift, not because the problem disappears, but because it is no longer carried alone. God never asked his people to be strong enough on their own. He invited them to lean on his strength, to rest in his promises, and to believe that his power is made perfect where human strength ends. Every season of uncertainty carries a purpose. Every delay, every unanswered prayer, every moment of waiting has been woven into a greater plan. What felt like silence was often preparation. What seemed like weakness was actually growth. God has been shaping faith, deepening trust, and preparing the heart for what lies ahead. Nothing has been wasted, and nothing has been overlooked. There are moments when the future feels unclear and the path ahead uncertain. Yet faith does not require full understanding to move forward. It only requires willingness to trust the one who sees the end from the beginning. God is not limited by time, resources, or human expectations. He moves with perfect wisdom, arriving neither early nor late, but always on time. When his moment comes, doors open that no one can shut, and answers arrive in ways that leave no doubt about their source. Worry once promised control, but delivered exhaustion. Faith now offers peace that does not depend on circumstances. This peace guards the heart and steadies the soul, allowing hope to rise even in the face of difficulty. It reminds the weary that God is near, attentive, and deeply involved in every detail of life. Nothing is too small for his care, and nothing is too great for his power. The impossible no longer stands as a threat, but as an invitation to trust deeper, to believe stronger, and to witness God's faithfulness in new ways. What once inspired fear can now become a testimony. What once caused anxiety can now strengthen faith. In God's hands, even the hardest moments are transformed into instruments of grace. As trust replaces worry, the heart finds rest. As faith grows stronger, fear loses its voice. And as life is surrendered fully into God's hands, peace becomes more than a feeling, it becomes a way of living. The journey continues, challenges remain, but confidence is restored. God is still working, still guiding, still providing, and still proving that nothing is impossible when the heart chooses to trust Him completely